The first thing the cowboy noticed was the sound, a tired cabin sighing every time the wind leaned on it, boards complaining like old bones. Widow Creek ran brown and restless below the hill, and the woman standing on the porch looked like she had learned how to stand against worse than weather. Her black dress was faded to the color of storm clouds, her hands rough, her eyes steady, and when the rider reined in his horse, she did not wave or smile. She simply watched him, as if measuring how much trouble a man could carry before it spilled. The hook of the moment caught him hard, because men rode past broken places all the time. But something in the way that cabin leaned, and in the way that widow stood, told him this was a stopping place. Whether he wanted it or not, he had not planned to stop. His plan was the usual cowboy sort of thing: ride until the sun dropped, sleep where the ground was kind enough, and move on before memories could catch him. But the cabin leaned another inch as a gust cut through the cottonwoods. A shutter clapped loose, and the widow stepped down off the porch to grab it. The nail head tore free, the wood split, and she swore once under her breath. Not loud, not pretty, just honest. The cowboy swung down before thinking, boots hitting dirt, reins loose in his hand, and said something foolish like, "Looks like that place is about to give up on you." She looked at him then, really looked, and replied, "It tried last winter. It failed." Her name was Clara May Hollis. Everyone along the creek knew it. Widow of a man crushed under a fallen cottonwood 3 years back. Owner of a cabin that had been meant as temporary shelter and had become a stubborn promise. The cowboy gave his name as Eli Turner, which was true enough, though it left out all the other things people had called him. He noticed the way her eyes flicked to his hands, scarred and steady, the way she clocked his horse, well cared for but travel-worn, and the way she did not ask where he was going. Folks who lived on the edge learned not to ask questions that invited disappointment. The cabin interior smelled of damp, pine, and old coffee. Daylight slipped through cracks that should have been sealed years ago, and the floor sagged near the hearth. Eli set his hat on the table and crouched, pressing a palm to a beam. "This sill is rotted," he said, careful, not ordering. Clara crossed her arms. "I know every sound it makes at night," she answered, like a sick child. He nodded, a strange gentleness settling over him. He talked through the problems as if the wood could hear him. Posts needing sistering, shingles missing, a doorframe racked by seasons of wind. She listened, not interrupting, because no one had ever taken inventory of her trouble like it mattered. Outside again the sky widened, clouds piling like herded cattle. Eli chewed on a thought while he tied his horse to the rail. "I could fix this," he said at last. Clara gave a short laugh. "You and half the men who passed through." He shook his head, meaning different. "I mean really, fix it. Take a week, maybe 2. She studied his face. The lines around his eyes were from squinting into sun and distance, not from lying. "And still," she said, "I do not have money for help." He shrugged. "I did not ask for money." She frowned. "Then why?" He answered with the truth that surprised him. "Because it needs fixing, and because I am tired of riding away from things that ask me to stay." The rain came early, fat drops thudding the dirt. They stood under the porch roof that barely did its job. Clara watched the creek swell. "You will want payment eventually," she said. "Men always do." Eli thought of jobs that paid in regret and miles, thought of nights where silence pressed too close. "I will take supper and a place by the stove," he said, "and I will stay until it stands straight." Her shoulders eased a fraction. Not trust yet, but less resistance. She opened the door and motioned him in, then added, "If you steal so much as a spoon, I will put a hole in your hat." He smiled. Fair terms. They worked through the afternoon rain, planning instead of hammering. Eli sketched with charcoal on a scrap of paper. Posts, braces, a new pitch to the roof. Clara brought out nails saved in a tin, boards pulled from a collapsed shed. Stories came with the materials. Her husband's laugh, the winter the creek froze, the year she learned to split kindling with one good swing. Eli listened, offering only what was needed. The cabin creaked, the storm pressed, and something like purpose settled between them. When night came, the stove took flame. The room warmed, and the sound of the rain turned from threat to promise later. With the fire low and the plan made, Eli stood and said the words that would change the shape of things. "I will fix it and stay too, just until it is done." Clara held his gaze, measuring again. The cabin popped softly, the creek whispered, and for the first time since her loss, she imagined waking to a house that did not argue with the morning. She nodded once, then twice. "All right, Cowboy," she said. "But understand this, once you start, you finish." Eli smiled, a slow, sure thing. And in that leaning cabin, on that restless creek, a bargain was struck that neither of them fully understood yet. Morning came with a pale sun and the sound of crows arguing in the cottonwoods. Eli was already awake, rolling his shoulders like a man about to face a long drive. Clara watched him from the doorway as he tested beams again, knocking, listening. As if the cabin spoke a language he understood better than people, they worked without much talk at first. The rhythm of labor filling spaces where words might have tripped. Eli jacked up the sagging sill with a borrowed lever and blocks of stone. Sweat darkened his shirt even in the cool air. Clara hauled boards and held nails steady, her hands sure, the kind of hands that had learned to finish what others left half done. The cabin groaned, lifted, settled, and for the first time in years the floor felt almost level under her boots, a small miracle that made her throat tighten. By midday the silence loosened. Eli talked while he worked, not confessions exactly, but edges of a life. Towns that rose and fell like bad habits, ranches that needed mending the way this place did. Clara answered in pieces too. About winters, when the creek cut her off from neighbors. About nights when grief rattled louder than wind. They did not look at each other much when those things surfaced, but the words landed clean, without judgment. When the rain returned, it did not stop them. They dragged a tarp over the roof frame and kept going. Laughter burst out of Clara once, when a board slipped and splashed mud up Eli's leg. She clapped a hand over her mouth as if surprised by herself, and Eli laughed with her, a real sound that seemed to strengthen the rafters as much as the braces did. The work grew heavier as the day wore on. Posts sistered with fresh timber, new footings dug, the smell of cut pine sharp and hopeful. Eli showed Clara how to notch clean, how to set a brace so it carried weight without complaint. She caught on fast, correcting him once when his measurement drifted. He raised his brows and said, "You sure you do not want to take over?" She answered, "Somebody has to make sure you do it right." The cabin slowly changed posture, standing straighter, the walls pulling back from their tired lean, and Clara felt something inside her do the same. A straightening she had not known she needed. Night found them bone-tired, hands blistered, clothes stiff with sweat and sawdust. Supper tasted better for it, beans and bread eaten by the stove, while rain ticked the new tarp overhead. Eli rubbed salve into his palms. Clara poured coffee. The fire threw light that softened the lines of her face. "You ever stay anywhere long?" she asked. He considered. "Long enough to fix what was broken, not always long enough to see if it held." She nodded, understanding more than he had said. The quiet after that was not heavy, it was earned. The next days followed a pattern that felt almost like belonging. Mornings with fog lifting off the creek, afternoons of hammer and saw, evenings of shared meals and careful stories. Clara found herself listening for Eli's step before she realized she was doing it. He found himself setting his bedroll closer to the stove without thinking. The cabin gained a new doorframe, square and solid, shingles stacked like promises waiting their turn. When neighbors rode by, they slowed. Curious, one tipped his hat and said, "Looks like you finally got help." Clara answered, "Looks like it," and the word help felt too small. Trouble came the way it always did, quietly at first. The creek swelled with late snowmelt, gnawing at the bank below the cabin. Eli studied it, jaw tight. "We need to shore that up," he said. Clara's chest tightened. That bank had taken a piece of her land every spring. They hauled rock, set a crude retaining wall, worked past dark by lantern light. The water slapped and hissed, testing their work. When it held through the night, Clara sat on the steps at dawn and cried. Not loud, not long. Eli stood a respectful distance away, then handed her a cup of coffee without a word, which somehow said everything. There were moments when the air shifted, when a touch lingered too long handing over a tool, when a look held more than practicality. Clara caught herself and stepped back, remembering how easily hope could turn into ache. Eli felt it too and did not push. He had learned the cost of rushing what needed time. Instead, he kept working, kept showing up, each nail driven straight, each board set true, as if building trust, the same way you built a house, one careful piece at a time. By the end of the week, the cabin stood changed. Not perfect, but proud, the roof solid, the walls braced, the floor steady underfoot. Clara ran her hand along the new beam and felt something settle in her chest. Eli packed his tools one evening and then did not saddle his horse. He sat by the fire instead, staring into it like a man weighing roads. Clara noticed and said nothing. The unspoken hung between them, because fixing a place was one thing, staying was another, and both of them knew the hardest work was not finished yet. The morning Eli finally reached for his saddle came quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man hear his own breathing too clearly. Clara watched from the window as he tightened the cinch. Her chest felt oddly hollow, like a room after furniture's been moved out. She told herself this was how it was supposed to go. Cowboys fixed things and rode on. Widows learned not to ask for more than the work itself. When he stepped onto the porch, she handed him a wrapped bundle of bread and salt pork without meeting his eyes. He thanked her, voice rougher than usual, then stood there, as if the boards beneath his boots were asking him a question he did not know how to answer. He said he would ride down river and see if the bank held through another rain, said it like a promise and a goodbye tangled together. Clara nodded, stiff, and turned away before hope could get a grip on her again. Hours passed, slow as sap. The cabin held firm when the wind rose. The creek tested the rocks and failed, and Clara felt pride twist into something sharper, a fear that the thing she had rebuilt might cost her what little peace she had left. When hoofbeats finally returned near dusk, she stood her ground, hands folded, heart pounding like a hammer against a stubborn nail. Eli did not dismount right away. He looked at the cabin first, straight and steady against the sky, then at Clara, and something settled in his face. "I have ridden a long way from places I fixed," he said, voice low. "I kept thinking motion meant freedom, but it just meant I never found out what stayed." Clara swallowed. The words pressed close to her ribs. He continued, "I said I would fix it and stay too, and I realized the fixing part is mostly done. The staying part is the work I am afraid of, because it matters." She stepped closer then, close enough to see the truth in his eyes, the kind that did not blink. She told him about the night her husband died, how the tree came down without warning, how the world could split in one breath. "I do not need rescuing," she said, steady. "I need honesty." Eli nodded. "That I can do," he said, and reached out, stopping short, asking without words. Clara closed the space herself, placing her hand in his, the contact, simple, grounding, not a promise of forever, but a promise of now. The cabin behind them creaked softly, not in complaint this time, but like an old thing settling into comfort. Staying turned out to be quieter than either expected. Days of finishing touches, a shelf here, a latch there, nights of shared meals and longer silences. Neighbors noticed, some curious, some approving, some wary. Clara held her head high. This was her place and her choice. Eli found himself learning the land instead of passing through it. The bend of the creek, the way fog clung to the low spots, the sound of the cabin at rest. He took on small jobs nearby, mending fences, trading labor for supplies, but he came back every night, and that was the part that mattered. The first real storm after the repairs came hard. Rain slashing sideways, wind howling like it meant to finish old business. Clara stood inside, listening, waiting for the familiar fear. But the cabin held, walls steady, roof tight. Eli stood beside her, close but not crowding. When the worst passed, she laughed, a free sound that surprised them both. The laughter spilled into relief, into gratitude, into something warmer. Eli took her into his arms then. No rush, no force, just the sure knowledge that some things were built to withstand where the seasons shifted. Grief loosened its grip without disappearing entirely, and love grew in its place. Not loud, not easy, but strong as good joinery. Clara found herself planning ahead again, planting more than she needed, thinking in terms of winters and springs. Eli stopped counting miles, started counting days. The cabin became more than shelter. It became a witness to shared mornings, to disagreements worked through instead of ridden away from, to the steady work of choosing each other when leaving would have been simpler one evening. As the sun burned low over Widow Creek, Clara leaned against the porch rail and said, "You never did tell me how long you planned to stay." Eli smiled, the lines around his eyes deeper now. "Kinder to, I reckon, until the place falls apart again," he said, "and when it does, we will fix it together." The cabin stood straight behind them, the creek ran on, and what had begun as a bargain ended as a home, built not just of wood and nails, but of two people who decided that staying was the bravest work of all.